So I'm going to now turn things over to Bryan, who's our presenter for the day. Bryan's the Managing Director for ESG and Carbon Strategies with WAP Sustainability, which is a full-service sustainability consultancy. They've been helping companies to measure, manage, and message about their sustainability performance for 16 years. Bryan's been in sustainability consulting for 15 years, and roughly 15 years prior to that was in corporate marketing and strategy. So his sustainability consultant experience ranges across the measurement of products and company impacts, development of products and company sustainability strategies, and reporting and disclosure of sustainability impacts, actions, and results for clients in a range of industries. So he's a very qualified individual to be leading today's session. Thrilled to have him here. Thank you, Bryan. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thanks very much, Wendy. Glad to be here and glad to have WAP participating in supporting this series. I'll start to bring my slides up here and we'll get started. All right, hopefully that's clearly visible for everybody. And yes, so again, appreciate being part of the program here today. I feel like this is a topic that I'm hopeful to be able to bring a good bit of experience with, as I've had a good bit of experience across both the corporate world and the sustainability consultancy world in measuring and managing impacts and strategy and developing strategies to address those risks and opportunities within a business and with a sustainability lens. So that's what we'll be talking about a lot today. And so what we'll really cover today is just to make sure we're talking the same language, what we mean by sustainability, and then why and how to measure and manage sustainability impacts as part of a sustainability strategy, talk about some best practices for implementation of that measurement management, and then the implementation of a sustainability plan, and recommended next steps for how to get going from here if this is something that is a little bit newer to your organization. So in terms of defining sustainability, I like to go back to one of the original definitions of sustainability that was developed by the Brundtland Commission that was commissioned by the United Nations to develop an approach to a more sustainable future. And that was back in 1987. And it's a really simple, clear definition of it, which is that sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So it really boils it down to a lot of the ideas of maintaining resources and not depleting or degrading those resources for ability of future use. And I really like the fact that since a lot of our audience on this session in this series is really sort of in the built environment and development oriented organizations for a lot of the different attendees today and throughout this series. I like the fact that this really refers to that development. We still want to be able to continue to develop and grow, but do that in a way that decouples that impact, those impacts on society and on the environment. You might have also heard about a concept called the triple bottom line. That's something that was back in the early days of sustainability. That's one of the ways that it was referred to as, and that referred to the fact that it's more than just profit for organizations. It really has to be about impacts and benefits and risks to the people involved and to the people in the community, as well as to the planet, and which is essentially the source of all the resources that any organization is going to use to succeed in its mission. That's evolved over the years and in recent times to the term that you may have heard a lot of, environmental, social, and governance, looking at those three realms and how they affect and are affected by your organization as well. The terminology kind of shifts from time to time in this industry and so on. And ESG was in favor as a term for some time and is now there's some question about whether it's the right term. But basically, sustainability really boils down to the measuring and managing of impact and risk, and developing plans to address those just like you would with any other business risk in your strategy that you would develop for your overall organization. So these are looking at it from two directions as well. It's the impacts and risks from your business to the people, nature, which is your resource base, and the community, and then the impacts to your organization from those same groups, the people, nature, i.e., in the form of natural disasters and risks like that, and the community that are coming from inwards towards your organization. And they address things like climate and waste, like you might obviously think about in the environmental world. In the social area, it's about things like anti-discrimination, ethics, human rights in the supply chain, and so on. Governance, how you run your business, things around ethics, decision making, diversity, anti-corruption, et cetera. And it's also, just important to emphasize that sustainability is not just about climate as well. This is a excerpt from the Morningstar Sustainalytics report from a couple of years ago, where corporate leaders were asked to list what they felt the top environmental, social, and government issues were, or the top sustainability issues were for them in the coming year. And you can see carbon came out on top, and that's obviously a really critical one. But then other non-carbon emissions, such as effluents and waste, was number two, but also a lot of non-environmental aspects as well, such as occupational health and safety being number four, human capital, business ethics, human rights in the top 10 there. And so these are the kinds of environmental impact, or sorry, sustainability impacts that you need to consider as you think about the different kinds of risks and opportunities present for your business. So why should businesses really care about this? And as I said, it's really that sustainability is all about reducing risks and pursuing opportunities. And it's just another piece of a good business strategy and good business practice. One way that people have looked at sustainability, sources of risk and value in sustainability over time, is on the right side here, where there's these real six key categories of risk and opportunity that sustainability generates. And the upwards arrow there indicates that while these things happen simultaneously, it's not as if it's a progression through those different value chain areas. Often companies do take them on a little bit in this way, in this order, but there's value in each one of the levels, and there's value in interchangeably. You move back and forth between them. But often companies will first focus on risk reduction, making sure you're in compliance with environmental or human rights in the supply chain laws and things like that. Also then mixing in shortly after that process improvement, finding ways to reduce the energy and waste used in your manufacturing process or your delivery or other operations. Then finding ways to do product improvements for sustainability, reducing the amount of virgin content, going to more recycled content, going to more sustainable materials, less toxic materials, and so on. And that can actually even lead to entirely new market opportunities like the organic food, category, or the electric vehicle category, or those kind of things. So that generates more market opportunities, some in very adjacent spaces, but also some in entirely new markets that didn't exist before. Also, those kinds of moves and demonstrating those kinds of sustainability commitments to the community can result in brand and culture benefits as well. That can mean brand reputation and improvement there, and being more prominently selected than your competitors because of that favorability in the consumer marketplace. Can be winning the battle for hiring great talent. And so, can really affect that in both areas in that way. The business context piece here really refers to the fact that businesses that have shown leadership in these areas can often get a chance to set the new rules for the environment as well, for the business environment is what I mean. For instance, being involved in and invited to contribute to setting the new ground rules for how to operate, more sustainably or more ethically or so on. And businesses that are more involved in that get to set the rules and are more prepared to be able to play in that new context. So that starts to get into the conversation of why measure it, because there are those sources of value and so forth. But it also really at the most fundamental level is that any business that wants to thrive needs to have a good business strategy, and a good business strategy isn't complete without the critical part that is the sustainability part of the business strategy. A strategy is really simply just a plan of action for achieving a desired result and getting where you want to go. So it boils down to as simply as knowing where you are and your current situation in terms of resources and business scenario, knowing where you want to go, and then developing or choosing the best path to get there. And by best path, we mean one that's aligned with the vision and values and mission of your business, suited to your current situation, scenario, resources, and the one that drives the best return on investment. And this sounds pretty basic and is probably pretty commonly done in your business strategy planning. But the key here is to really make sure that you're applying a sustainability lens to an element of your business planning as well. Um, and then, measurement and management is really just kind of like, measurement lets you know where you're starting from, how you're progressing, when you've attained it, when you've gotten off track, how you need, and what you need to do to get back on track. And then management, of course, is just the implementation of those, towards of the initiatives and the actions that are going to support those goals and targets that you have set as part of your strategy. So pretty high level stuff, but just wanted to kind of establish that and emphasize that doing that from a sustainability lens is really what this all entails. Sometimes there's a lot of added complexity and added jargon put onto it in the sustainability world. But when it comes down to it, it really isn't that much different than good, solid business planning, just putting that resource and sustainability risk and opportunity lens on it. When you get into that planning process, there's one that's been traditionally talked about that you might have heard of, the kind of plan, do, check, act sort of cycle. I like to revise that one a little bit when I talk about it and um, share it in the form of understand, plan, engage and act, and review and report progress. So on understanding, you want to measure and understand those impacts and those drivers from you to your environment. And by that I don't just mean the natural environment, but just the landscape, the social, environmental, and economic landscape, and the impacts of them on you, your business. Planning, developing the strategy, targets, and plans to act on the most critical elements of that landscape, and then engaging and acting, implementing and tracking the results of that plan, and reviewing and reporting progress, particularly understanding how much and what the right balance for your organization is in terms of internal reporting and external reporting, and what combination of that do you want to do? What's right for your organization? So one of the things that you really want to do at the beginning is a sustainability risk and opportunity assessment. And you want to look at it from the standpoint of all of the full landscape in which you operate. And we think about it from this standpoint that every company exists within an industry. That industry exists within a community. The community exists within a larger global society, and then all of that exists within the environment. We sometimes think the environment is like that place we go that's got the green space that we go to with a kayak on the back of the car, but we're all within the environment. It's everything comes from that environment. It's the source of all of our resources, et cetera. And so thinking about things from those kinds of stakeholder viewpoints is going to be important. And you can't think about everything equally. You have to focus on the most critical items. And you might have heard about the concept of financial materiality. When you hear about companies doing their financial reporting, they report on the most material items, the most material risks and opportunities to their business. And so that's applied in part of your sustainability planning as well, in the sense of, like, on the left there, you see it's described as the high priority impacts, risks, and opportunities, sometimes called IROs, to your business from those stakeholder groups that are shown here. But there's a second part of materiality too. There are material impacts of your industry, of your business, I should say, on the industry, communities, society, and the environment as well. And a double materiality assessment, which is a term you're hearing about more and more these days, and is kind of best practices in terms of assessing your impacts, is taking into account both of those types of material impacts. And you want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into those kinds of stakeholders that exist within those different bands, and to really consider making sure that the environment is thought of as a stakeholder, because it is that source of resources, and you don't want to deplete or degrade that to such a degree that it starts to adversely affect your business and your ability to operate, but also the industry and the environment in which you live and work. In the society and local community, there's governmental bodies, regulators, advocacy groups, both at the more global level, more at the local level. And the industry stakeholders are the ones that most companies are most familiar with and probably spend most of their time thinking about: suppliers, partners, customers, competitors, investors, regulators, industry associations, and so on. And then within the company itself, there's the organization itself, and then your employees are clearly a key stakeholder as well. So in a sustainability risk and opportunity assessment, you want to take into account the views, impacts, and so on of these different stakeholders, but again, prioritizing based on the most material or impactful effects of and on each of these different stakeholders. Here's an example of just one of many that's out there of how a company has approached their stakeholder outreach and determining some of their material topics. And you want to go through that process. You could have a whole, webinar on that one, and there are some webinars in this series on some of the topics in here as well. So I encourage you to go look at those as well. But we'll just touch on this one at a bit of a high level here. This is James Hardy, the building cladding manufacturer, and they've got a really nice sustainability report that describes their approach to this and how they've set their goals and targets and measured against them and reported on them. And they narrow down to key stakeholders of communities, consumers, uh, customers and architects, employees, investors, and suppliers. And it shows there some various ways from surveys to direct meetings to other kinds of outreach, how they engage regularly with those stakeholders to get inputs on what is most critical for them from a sustainability lens. And then through a materiality assessment process, they listed these top material topics of circularity, climate, governance and ethics, and won't read down the list, but you can see the rest there, down into those occupational health and safety, product quality, et cetera. And so just one example of moving from that stakeholder conversation through a process to identifying what's going to be most important for that organization to look closely at. Here's one other example from Mohawk, the carpet and floor covering manufacturer, which I purposely put the more detailed page in here. We won't go through it all here today, but I do encourage you to go back and look at this because they do a nice, concise conversation here about how they approach the double materiality assessment of looking at their impacts outward, which is the vertical axis, things where they have more impact on their stakeholders are higher on that grid on the upper right. And the financial impact, the impact of those other stakeholders on their business, those that are the highest are at the right side of that lower axis, the x-axis there. And you can see that there's a grouping of about 8 critical items that they identified, most material, 6 of them being environmental, 2 being in that more social human side. And those are the things that they're going to focus on the most in their sustainability planning and strategy. You also want to take a look at the overall landscape as you're looking at that sort of environmental risk and opportunity assessment. And you might have heard about a pest analysis, or what has been in more recent times considered a pestle analysis by adding in the environmental and legal aspects that weren't always perhaps covered in the past on this type of an assessment. But that's really looking at those political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal trends, developments, impacts, and risks, that will affect your business or that are emerging and potentially affect your business and your industry. Again, you can't look at everything. It's like boiling the ocean. You don't want to try to get into too much detail on all of it. You do want to do an effective scan and identify and flag the most critical ones that look like they could have the largest, impact or opportunity, and of course focus more on those. And that's kind of where the art of it does come in. A lot of it is, again, fairly kind of common good business strategy work and concepts, but the expertise and the art comes in knowing what is most important out of those different trends for your particular business. Also, a good way to really get a sense for key things that you need to be looking for with a sustainability lens is by doing a peer or competitor benchmarking. What kind of actions are your peers and competitors taking? What kind of risks and opportunities are they publicly talking about? What are your particular strengths and weaknesses and their particular strengths and weaknesses per your observation in the marketplace? What opportunities and threats are emerging based on what you're hearing from them and other sources? And those sources can be typical ones that you'd use for industry risk scanning, industry news sources, associations, newsletters, analyst reports, et cetera, general business and economic news, public communications from peers and competitors, and your general industry expertise and history and experience in the industry. Here's just an example of some of those outward outward impacts that can affect your business, and that's regulation. We won't go into any detail on these. There's just too much, and this is just a very, very tip of the iceberg snapshot of a few of them. But you can see that there are numerous global impacts from regulations. Some of them, like you might be hearing in the news now, CSRD, CSDD, CBAM, which stand for the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Those have been established, but are now under some proposals for potential revision. And that can talk to you both about the fact of these regulations continuing to emerge and become more stringent, but also then some back and forth about how stringent they should ultimately be. So you need to have a good sense and be able to predict and plan for how you're going to deal with some of the different uncertainties that come from these different types of developments. In the US, we've listed just a couple here, but also probably the biggest point in the US is that some of these things can change regularly, like the one in the middle of the listing there, the SEC climate risk regulation had been paused indefinitely. And I think I heard just literally today that it looks like it has now been discontinued under the new administration. Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act have existed for a long time, but they also maybe are under some consideration for change here in a new political administration. That also then leads to the emergence of state regulations, though, and can create even more of a plethora of emergence of new regulations at the state level. And you can see several of them from states like California, Colorado, New York, New Jersey, Illinois. There's some that aren't listed here as well, Texas, Oregon, other states, all around things like increasing expectations around reporting your carbon emissions, reporting on your various other kinds of environmental and social sustainability impacts, or more specific drilled down kind of issues like an embodied carbon and recycled content regulation on carpet. They can get as very specific. So just a note to indicate that you want to have a scan of these types of regulations. And here's just one more snapshot of a few others around the US and North America to be aware of. These can be a reference that you can come back to after the presentation as well. And you want to just have a good plan for how you will keep a scan on these kinds of developments in the regulatory arena. We're still in the understand phase of the process here. You want to measure and understand your impacts. And here's just a high level, absolutely very high level look at it from a carbon perspective. There is an entire session, webinar in this series that'll be coming up soon that I recommend that you view if you're interested in it for carbon reporting. So we won't get into that in detail here, but basically it really just simply boils down to knowing the activities that you're undertaking and measuring the various materials and fuel sources and so on used in those activities, such as heating and transport fuel used, electricity used in your buildings and facilities, or on your construction sites, et cetera. Materials and supplies used in your operations, whether that's wood, metals, concrete, plastics, et cetera, and the waste generated. And all of those things, through various types of scientific research and so on, have been associated with what we call emissions factors. They're available in public sources like the EPA and in industry databases. And the various kinds of emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions from those activities are converted into a unit of measure that is equivalent to the emissions that carbon would generate. And so just for consistency purposes, and that leads to a metric that's used of the kilograms of carbon dioxide or CO2 equivalent is the term that is used. And so just the activity times the carbon emissions factor leads to the total absolute emissions of your organization, divided down into various categories, such as what we refer to as Scope 1, which is the liquid fuels and so on that are combusted in your vehicles and operations facilities. Scope 2 is the purchased electricity that's used by your organization. And Scope 3 is basically everything else that's upstream and downstream of your operations, like the incoming deliveries, outbound distribution and transportation, business commuting, business travel, the purchase of the goods and services, all the impacts that go into the producing of the materials that you use. And this can be totaled up and then broken down by key activity, key business unit or division, key geographic location. So that's about a 90-second description of a detailed process for calculating carbon emissions. As I said, there's a full webinar on that. If you're interested in diving deeper into that, please join that one. And here's just some examples of how a couple of organizations have reported their greenhouse gas emissions, their carbon emissions. On the left is excerpt from the Interface 2023 impact report, where they're reporting it in absolute totals, which is really the gold standard. Recommended way to do it is to report those absolute cumulative totals. You can see that they've reported it in terms of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, with scope 3 being by far the largest for them, as it is for almost every company. All that upstream and downstream activity is almost always 80, 90 plus percent of the impact of many companies. And then you can also look at it at an intensity level too, which means taking those greenhouse gas emissions and applying them to some other unit of measure, such as you can see on the right with the Century Communities sustainability report excerpt, that they've taken their total emissions and divided it out across, per million units or per $1 million of sales or per home delivered. And that just gives a different snapshot, different viewpoint of the emissions. But it's probably best practice to really look at it in both ways and to communicate those total emissions too, because total emissions, really give you a sense of what your overall impact is. Your emissions per some unit of growth, per some unit of revenue, for example, can go down. But if your revenue and your business is still growing, then your overall emissions to the atmosphere and to the environment is still increasing. So you want to really be able to kind of measure it at both levels and try to decouple those emissions and that impact from the growth that you're having. Won't go into it in a lot more detail here. I want to just kind of keep it at a little bit of a higher level, but you obviously want to know the impacts on other key areas for your business too. And it's important to mention key areas for your business as well. Some are going to be more material for your business than others. Like maybe you're a business that doesn't have as many effluents to water or effluents to air because of the nature of your business and so on. So that wouldn't be one that you would focus on as much. But maybe it's a heavy, solid waste generating business or something like that. So just showing a couple of metrics here that can be used for that. Massive waste by tons in solid waste, water withdrawals, total water consumption, which is really the withdrawals from the local water system, minus the water returned to the system. You also want to look at the water scarcity and the water risk level of the local watershed in which you operate. And there are resources from like the World Resources Institute or WRI, World Resources Institute or WWF, formerly World Wildlife Fund, which have tools that allow you to, that give a good sense of the water risk of various locations and so on. And you, of course, it will become a more material topic, a more important topic for you to be tracking for your facilities that are in those water scarce environments, as an example. On the social side, similar types of things. You want to be understanding what those more material impacts for you are and what the right metrics are to use to track against them. Could be on the health and safety side, a very common one for so many businesses, total recordable incident rates or lost time injury frequency rates, number of safety training programs run and the percentage of employees that have successfully gone through the program, just can be measured at those kinds of levels as well to demonstrate your commitment and see how well you're doing in terms of meeting that commitment to increase, health and safety. Human rights, number of incidents of discrimination, harassment, et cetera, reported, human rights programs run and the training completion rate. Can look at things in pay equity, for example, like the pay levels of various, ethnic groups, gender, et cetera. And then, compare across similar levels of experience and so forth. So, pretty simple examples here, but just to give an idea of recommending that you take that look across your business, understand what the most critical items are for your business and establish the right metrics and so on to use for them. On the governance side of things, you want to be able to know that you've got in place the right core elements for good governance. Even if you're a smaller organization that doesn't have a board, sometimes it might be about board independence, number or percentage of independent directors on the board. If you're a smaller company that doesn't have a board, that one's not material for you, but you still are going to benefit from having, business code of conduct, ethics policies and good business practices, training your employees on those kinds of things. And what are the dedicated roles in your organization for making sure that the company is fully adhering to good business ethical practices and governance practices. So we then start to get into developing the strategy. Now that you've spent a good bit of time there on the understand part, but it goes back a little bit almost to that old adage of measure twice and cut once. You will be able to better plan your strategy and approach and make it the most appropriate one for your particular business and your particular situation by getting the best handle you can on all of those, the most critical material items from that collection of various types of impacts and so forth. And so spending the time on that is very valuable. And then that helps you, it makes it more obvious actually, even as to, what to plan on, what the key areas to focus the most on in an effective plan. And an effective strategy, of course, aligns first of all with your company vision, mission, and values, describes both what you will do and importantly what you won't do, because you can't do everything, and it is a lot about prioritization and so on. So what you will and won't do to achieve that strategic objective, and is also specific to your resources and situation. It's often said that if your plan could be picked up and used identically by somebody else, then it's probably not quite specific enough for you. There are a lot of core things that do carry over from one plan to another, one strategy to another, especially at the bigger picture level when you're looking at overall business strategy in an industry, or strategy to reduce environmental and social sustainability risks. However, there are going to be some specific things related to your particular business, what you do and don't do in terms of what your business, model is, and also what resources you have, and what vision and direction you want to go in. So the building blocks of strategy are shown here. Starts with a goal, and then indicators, targets, metrics, initiatives, and actions. And touching on these really briefly with a quick example, goal is obviously the overall aim or desired result you're trying to get to. Using waste as an example, the goal could be to reduce total waste to landfill, resulting in environmental and cost benefits. Indicators are what we'll measure to check progress against that goal. So stating, okay, we'll use percentage of waste diverted from landfill. The target is the level we want to achieve on that indicator. And it generally should be time bound as well. So there's a little bit of a change that would be recommended here would be to add even the timing by which we want to achieve that 90% of waste diverted from landfill to hit that SMART objective kind of approach, which we'll touch on in just a minute. And then the metric is the specific measurements that go against that target to make sure of how we're tracking on it. And that's, just doing the regular measurement of the, of the metrics on that target to be able to report progress. The initiatives are, of course, the prioritized programs and actions to make progress towards that goal. And so that could be things like, all right, we're going to undergo training for our full team on waste diversion methods. We'll host waste treasure hunts, which is where we have the organization at each different facility look for all the different opportunities they can do to reduce waste and save cost throughout the organization. And then this is where at the initiative level, that's where a lot of the real prioritization comes in. That's where a lot of the real specific tailoring of the plan to your particular organization, because you can't do everything. And this is where you really, again, have to figure out those things that are going to be the most impactful types of initiatives to employ. And then the actions are just when you take that and boil it down to the real tactical plan of who's going to do what by when, and really get down into the tactical and the action plan of, who's responsible for delivering those training programs, who's responsible for reaching out and contacting potential partners to become other sources where we could send material to be reused that would have otherwise been waste, and so on. So finding some alternate resource streams for what used to be waste, and so on. And it's really getting down to the individual responsibilities on that. Won't cover this in too much detail because it's probably pretty common to people, but obviously it's really important to keep goals in that SMART kind of concept, which is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And again, this just goes to show again that the ideas that we talk about in sustainability strategy and planning are not significantly different than anything you would do in normal business planning. It's just putting that sustainability lens on it. But you want these to be specific, measurable. Achievable is a big one too, to make sure that it is a stretch, but also accomplishable, so that there is progress that can be shown to get those wins, and kind of keep momentum going. Relevant to the most important material topics again, and in time bound to make sure there's accountability for the organization and the individuals. One more example, or maybe I think there's a second one after this as well, just on going through this with a carbon emissions goal. So if the goal is on reducing carbon emissions, transitioning to renewable sources of energy, indicator percent reduction in total carbon emissions, the target could be to specifically reduce scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions 40% by 2030, 90% by 2050, for example. The metrics will be tracking those Scope 1 emissions, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions from certain key categories. The initiatives could be a list of 30 to 50 initiatives narrowed down to something like, 8, 10, 12, 20, whatever is appropriate based on the prioritization, the resources of the organization. But it may involve things like fuel and electricity efficiency programs, et cetera, conversion to renewable energy, lower emissions and renewable content in materials, and so on. And then getting that down into a work plan with the actions and so forth. Just looking at that from a community engagement kind of goal on the more social side of the spectrum, if the goal is to increase the company's contribution to connection with local communities, an indicator could be the number of community engagement and volunteering programs implemented per year. Target could be at least 8 community engagement volunteering programs run in 2025, with 75% of team members participating in at least one event, or whatever target is appropriate, for your situation and for the goal and indicator that you've set. The metric is just tracking against those. The initiatives are to plan out the actual specific community engagement events that will be, engaged with the right partners, and plan for the execution of those. The action plan is just the details of that execution. Here's an example from the real world, again from James Hardy, about their target on Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions, and some of the key initiatives that they targeted for that and undertook. So the gray bars here, and this gets at a little bit of how they publicly report on it too. So it starts to move into that idea too of how you might report on these things. The gray bar at the left describes the scope of their, or the size, the amount of their Scope 1 and 2 emissions at the current time, or in their baseline year. And the second gray bar on top of that would be the assumed business as usual emissions through 2030 if they stay on the current trajectory and don't implement the initiatives over to the right. The green bars represent the projected, calculated, and anticipated reductions in emissions from those various initiatives that are shown, such as grid decarbonization, which isn't really under the control of any organization, but is something that helps drive some of the reduction. Use of renewable electricity, natural gas, transition to natural gas, and increasing the efficiency of some of the natural gas systems. Switching equipment to electric is the next one, and then removing coal from their operations, as they still had some residual coal powered processes. And you can see the various levels of the different contributions that each of those will make to the reduction. We call this a waterfall chart, and I think it's a really good way to give a snapshot of where you are today, where you want to go with the dotted bar over at the far right, and how the different initiatives expect to get you there. Here's another example of just a little bit more of a qualitative description of some initiatives that were implemented. This is just some of a long list of different initiatives implemented by the Hunt companies, the property developer and home builder, in their 2023 sustainability report. And they talk about, among other things, having some initiatives around healthy materials, giving preference to products that have disclosure of their chemical ingredient composition, and products that avoid chemicals of concern. Having an embodied carbon policy that prioritizes products that have environmental product declarations, or EPDs, which are specific reports of the impact of the particular product in question, which many of you, if you're involved in the built environment industry, are pretty familiar with. It's one of the most common industries that uses those types of reports. But giving preference to organizations and products that do report on their embodied carbon, so that they can seek products and materials that are lower embodied carbon, and a green building policy of continuing to implement efficiency and green building programs within their ongoing processes and approaches to the building and production of their homes and communities. So I covered a good bit there in terms of the high-level planning piece, and then want to just touch a little bit on the implementation and the engage and act area. So a good way to read this slide is kind of across each line and then down. So kind of right to left and down, kind of puts it into the process. That's a good way to think about it. Things don't happen in generally just perfectly sequenced, but it does have a little bit of the flow of how you want to think about it as you prepare to implement a plan. So, first of all, you really want to make sure you have that C-level commitment from the highest leaders within your organization, CEO, CFO, COO, and so on, to make sure that it's communicated to the organization that this is something that does align with our mission and values and journey that we're on. And you want to then communicate that vision clearly, boil it down to those most material items, those most high priority targets and goals. Involve the frontline team. That means both in the goal setting process through the materiality interviews and so on. Get the input from your team and your frontline workers and so on. Also, even more critical probably is to get them involved in putting together the implementation plan. Like, how are we actually going to then achieve these goals? Be much less effective if you're not involving them in how to achieve those goals, because they know how things work. They know what doesn't work. They know what might already be enacted in some of these places that the senior level managers might not even be aware of. Provide training and resources. Make sure that the team that's going to implement really has a good handle on understanding the general concepts and what's needed, and make sure that they have the resources sufficient to accomplish the tasks, to make them smart, to make them achievable, and part of that smart concept. Seek both small and big wins. And that might, on the surface, sound like it means pursue everything, but it doesn't. That's not what we're talking about there. What it means is, on those prioritized items that you are focusing on, some of them are going to be those things that are really huge benefits from an environmental impact reduction perspective, but also from a cost reduction perspective too. But they might also be ones that take a long time and are very complex to implement. And so you want a good mix, in almost like a portfolio kind of approach to your sustainability strategy, that you want to have a good mix of those ones that are a little bit smaller on beneficial impact, but quicker to accomplish. So you can build that momentum, build that feeling of success, build some early wins. And also some of those that are more complex and take longer. And then sometimes some that mix and match. The ideal one is one that would be major impact and easy to implement. And those are the real home runs. So look to have that good portfolio mix of your approach to the initiatives that you take on. You want to communicate regularly and openly, always good in any business situation, but very critical in implementing a new plan like this, and something that may be new to some of the employees on the team. Recognize and reward progress. Again, as you have some of those smaller and/or bigger wins across the journey, across the path, recognize through, sometimes it doesn't have to always be financial incentive or financial recognition, but it can be just recognition, congratulations, support, championing the different individuals or facilities or divisions that are achieving certain milestones. And speaking of those milestones, track and share those success metrics. The more you can share those publicly with the team, the more they'll be engaged with them. And be prepared to adapt and refine as needed. Probably quarterly is a good time to take a look at the plan and see how it's progressing. Probably at least every half year, to kind of make sure that there's no major kind of reshaping or redirecting of the strategy. And certainly no less than every year, to really look at it and see how you're progressing, see if there's any major shifts needed in the overall direction of the plan. Then, as we kind of quickly move into the review and report section of the process, again, looking at this, some of the best practices here are to determine the right balance of internal and external reporting that you want to do. Certainly, internal reporting is going to be really valuable to make sure that everybody is engaged and knows whether they and the overall team are on track. But there can be a lot of benefit to external reporting as well, in distinguish yourself from your peers competitively, in answering the requests and questions that some of your stakeholders may have, et cetera. So understand what's going to be the best balance for you in internal versus external reporting. Use relevant frameworks. It might be things like regulatory frameworks, like if you're subject to or in scope of the California Senate Bill 253 and 261 climate risk and carbon impact regulations, or maybe some of you are a larger company that are subject to the CSRD regulations and so forth that are come out of Europe, but for businesses that do business in Europe. Maybe it's non-governmental ones as well, like LEED, or some of the frameworks in the built environment, LEED, the Well Building Initiative, the Living Building Challenge, et cetera. Make sure you're using those proper frameworks to guide your approach to implementation. Focus on the most material topics. Again, it can be easy to get kind of distracted and watered down by some of those many other issues that are out there in the environment, in the landscape. but focus on those more material ones that you've identified in the first step of the process. Balance between quantitative and qualitative metrics. Some of them are going to be more measurable, like carbon impacts or like waste reduction. Some of them are going to be a little bit more qualitative, like some of the ethics ones or the human rights ones and so forth. But there's value in each of those for what they tell about how sustainably you're managing your risks and opportunities. Again, go back to using dashboards, make it easy to see at a snapshot how you're progressing against those key, most high priority initiatives. Use simple language. There's a lot of jargon and a lot of abbreviations that get thrown around in the sustainability world. We've tried to pull a good bit of those out of here today in the conversation. And we recommend that you try to do that as well, especially for people in your organization that are a little bit less familiar and a little bit farther removed from, the actual, like the actual deep details of the regulation itself or what have you. Show progress over time. One of the bigger downfalls that some companies have in their sustainability reporting is, in the 2025 report, they might show 2024's carbon data, for example, and then in 2026, they might show 2025's carbon data, but they don't show the back years as much, or they just show a couple of back years. Best practice is really to show a pretty good, progression of those years that you've been involved with your journey, so that you can show that progress over time, particularly showing that baseline year and going forward. If there are way too many years, there are things you can do graphically to show that in a approachable way, by having some of the information be shown elsewhere, and just show the baseline year and the most recent several years. But there are ways you can do it. But the bottom line is to really, best practice is to show that progress over time on your key indicators. Be transparent and authentic. Another downfall that some have in their reporting is they only report the good news, and then the bad news gets found out by someone else in some other way and gets reported in a way that isn't controllable by your organization, and you can't explain anything about that, put it in context or what have you. It's better and more, and it's a better risk avoidance practice and perspective to be upfront, talk about all the things that are working, the things that aren't working so well, and what you're doing about those things that aren't working so well. Encourage stakeholder engagement. Again, that's both in terms of the development of your plan and the implementation of it and the development of your report, but also encourage those outside stakeholders that are reading and reviewing the report to come back to you with any questions, challenges, et cetera. It's better for you to know those questions that they have so that you can better address them, rather than for them to have those questions and not come to you with them and just make a judgment about maybe going elsewhere if they feel like you maybe not doing something that they deem as appropriate in terms of your sustainability. So we covered those at a kind of a high snapshot level, but just wanted to share, some general best practices in those other areas of the overall sustainability planning process. The last thing we'll show then here is just a little bit of an example, and this is just a couple examples of just a portion of the reporting that some companies have done. There's a lot of examples out there, and a lot of things that can be reported on. But again, two ones that I think show a good example of this are how James Hardie in their 2024 report and Mohawk in their 2023 report shared some of their key metrics and so forth. You can see on the one on the left, James Hardie, where some of their key material topics were reducing their scope 1 and 2 emissions, recycling water, minimizing waste, increasing diversity, prioritizing safety. And you can see that they've gone back a number of years in some cases, a little more in some, a little less in others, but are showing that progress and showing it in a very digestible, simple manner. And then over on the right, you see a little bit more, almost like a little bit of a public dashboard kind of approach. You can use internal dashboards that show things in certain ways, and then certain ways to simplify that for the general public as well. And you can see some of the topics that they've looked at, a climate reduction on their scope 1 and 2 over on the left, product circularity with a reduction in waste to landfill, reducing their total water withdrawal intensity over a certain baseline year by 2025, biodiversity goals, workforce goals, and so on. And you can see that they've got kind of that bar chart progress kind of thing, where some of those targets were set for 2025. They've achieved some of them already, or are very close to in other cases. And what we would recommend there then is on those 2025 goals, of course, set that next goal, stretch that next one out to, 2030 or whatever it is. But two, kind of good examples of many that are out there in terms of how to kind of concisely report on some of those key material metrics. So with that, we'll just summarize how you might go forward from here. If you're just kind of newly adding a sustainability focus to your general business planning, And I would say to, assess where your organization is in terms of measuring and managing your sustainability impacts, risks, and opportunities. And then, in a way, kind of develop a plan for developing your plan. In other words, develop the plan for how you will um, mix in sustainability lens thinking into your general business strategy planning process, and how you'll kind of advance the measurement and management of those sustainability related impacts, risks, and opportunities from wherever you are today. Like if you're doing some of it, that's great. Think about the things that you can add to that. If you're not doing as much of it, then think about how you kind of start an overall program or approach. Um, Prioritize the most important or material, as we call them in this concept, areas based on your company, industry, situation, resources, et cetera. Determine what you can do internally and where external support from partners, collaborators, consultants, and so on could help. And there are many resources out there. There's some really excellent resources on the supply chain sustainability schools set of materials, and even in this series that this is a part of, as well as many other resources on the website and so on. There are many others out there as well. There are peers, there are consultancies, there are all kinds of other sources. And try not to reinvent the wheel on some of that as well. But know what you can do internally, where external support is helpful, and what's been done by others that you can learn from. So with that, we can wrap it up and turn it back to Wendy for any questions that have come up. Happy to touch on those and go from there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bryan. Really great presentation. I found it really interesting. I hope everyone got as much out of it as I did. Just in terms of the Q&A, happy for anyone to hop in the chat. I had a couple of questions just to get the discussion going. So I'm aware that, of the audience within the supply chain school, we've got, obviously, we've got companies with one person in it, and we have companies with thousands of people in it. So my question is, I mean, obviously there are going to be some barriers to getting going, and we've talked a lot about how we can overcome them in this session. Do you think that there are different barriers if you're dealing with a large company versus a small company?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where we try to make the concepts here today fairly general so that they can be applied because they really can be applied to any really large organization or a really small organization. And then there are some specific things, like there are certain regulations that only large organizations are going to be subject to, and that kind of thing. So that's where some of the specificity comes into it. We tried to cover that at a little bit more of a general conceptual level today too, because if you know the general concepts of it and the core of it, then you can deal with the specifics, individually as they matter for your particular situation. And to your specific question there, yeah, the different barriers and so on. Obviously, with the smaller the organization is, some of the barriers are going to be resource availability, that kind of thing, expertise. You may not be able to have either the dollars to make the investments, or you might not have the ability to have a dedicated person on the team that can be your sustainability expert, or the dedicated team of sustainability people that can be your expert. So you might have to try to find very cost effective ways to get outside support, or you might have to look for all those kind of low cost and cost effective resources that might already be out there. Look for things from organizations like the SCSS or other industry associations, et cetera, that can provide that support. On the other end of the scale, the bigger organizations, they might have those resources a little bit more readily available, but they also have the kind of the startup barriers there, or the barriers to advancement there might be some of the inertia that happens from a big company. Like how do you get everybody rallied? How do you get everybody understanding the same thing? Like it might sound strange to maybe you think, oh, everybody already knows what sustainability means, but in an organization of a huge number of people, maybe not. Maybe everybody's got a different picture of that. So you got to get everybody on the same page a little bit first. And so, different problems for different types kind of things. And those are the kind of things to actually think about a little bit as you get into your strategy too. Like what are our kind of particular sort of barriers to progress going to be?
Great. Yeah. Just one more quick question. I had this thought that kept sort of popping into my head, and we covered it a little bit when we talked about best practice. But I knew of a contact in a construction firm based in the UK whose sole job it was to manage spreadsheets, to pull data in from different projects and different business units, and that's what they did. That was their full-time job. And I just wanted to bring that up on this call, to say, well, how does a company avoid the death by spreadsheet scenario? Yeah, we talked about having dashboards and things like that, but I'm wondering if you could share any tools that you've found in your experience that would help with reporting and data collection.
Yeah, it's a real problem. That's been one that's been like a kind of an ever-present problem throughout the emergence of the sustainability journey, from all these years, and has probably become even more so recently with some the different kinds of regulations that are starting to crop up. Um, and so I think it comes back to, again, looking at what's most critical for your organization, most material, not trying to cover everything. Spend the effort and the time on the reporting, which means the data collection and sometimes the spreadsheets or the software tools or the whatever that are going to be actually benefiting you in addressing some of the more critical items to your business rather than investing that precious time that you've got on that on everything else and spreading too thin on that. So that's kind of a starting point. There is an ever evolving set of and pool and marketplace for all kinds of tools out there and so on as well. From the standpoint of software as a service type solutions, AI based solutions, and there are some things like that. So it's more than we can cover in a short answer, and even in the tail end of a short session here today could be a session in and of itself just to introduce to some of those, which might not be a bad one to kind of add to the mix.
We'll think
But
about that.
and so there are organizations out there that can help you sift through maybe what the right tools are for you. But doing a little bit of searching around what those right kind of tools are that can help consolidate and make easier some of that data collection and management can help a little bit. And yet, on the other side of that, that has added a good bit of complexity too, because there are so many out there now that there's a little sorting and sifting you even have to do to identify those tools. So I don't want to kind of give people a bit of a fear about the fact that it still does remain pretty complex on that. But I would say that take focus on the most material things, utilize tools wherever you can, and identify the right ones for yourself to try to minimize the grunt work of it. Have the tools do the routine work or the collection work or the data manipulation work, the calculation work, so that you can focus a little bit more on the strategic thinking about it.
Great. Okay,
And
well,
the last thing I'll mention
oh,
on that is there are a number of those out there at various sort of ranges of scope, complexity, and price that can be reachable, sometimes for the smaller organization, and other ones designed more to handle the needs of a bigger organization and things.
yeah, perfect. Well, on that note, we're wrapping up just on time. So we'll leave it there. If anyone does have any questions in the future, please feel free to get in touch. Bryan's contact details are in the slides, which I said will be distributed after the session. There we go. Perfect. And if you do have any other questions specific to the school, feel free to get in touch with myself. My contact details are wendy@supplychainschool.com, or you can reach our generic inbox, which is info@supplychainschool.com. If you're not yet registered, would really encourage you to do that. The school's got lots of resources, which are on the slide right now. We've got 2 workshops on the horizon. Carbon reporting, which is happening next Wednesday, and we have a session on net zero and science-based targets, which is happening in May. We would love to see you there. And in the meantime, the resource library is available to you, which has got loads of resources on a multitude of subtopics. Really encourage you to have a look, play around, browse. And I hope you find it useful. So thanks again for attending this session, and we'll hope to see you at the next event. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.